So you're a science fiction author, and it's the end of the 1980s. Computing power has been growing exponentially, and you think it's maybe time to think about that whole artificial intelligence thing. You basically have two options. You could go and examine the impact artificial intelligence might have on human society. You could wrestle with the question, what does artificial intelligence actually mean? You could look at, like, how would humanity react to artificial intelligence? How would artificial intelligence react to humanity? All those are options. Or you could write a religious pamphlet built on a romantic poem about Greek gods. If you picked number two, you're right here, because we're going to talk about the Fall of Hyperion. Cheers. Alright, so this is part 2 of my ongoing Downfall of Dan Simmons series, and I will examine all of his science fiction novels, and I urge you to go and watch the video on Hyperion, because I will come back to and circle back to things that I said there to have an ongoing narrative here. That being said, this will also be full spoilers. I will actually spoil everything. I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but if you're sensitive to that kind of stuff, then don't. I'm trying to make a larger point here that goes beyond just the plots of these stories. So, there you are. Let's talk about what's going to happen. Alright. See, last time, I had a very easy job. I just followed along the story of Hyperion, which is handily grouped in 6 novellas and a frame narrative. That made it very easy to go through the whole thing and make my points individually. This time around, I can't do this because I faced the same problem that Dan Simmons faced, which is how to continue from there. And I figured I'll do the easy thing. I'll explain the challenges of the Fall of Hyperion, and then I'll give a quick plot summary, and then I'll talk about why all of this is kind of difficult to, just shrug off. I don't want to use the word problematic here. That's my point. So, that's the plan for today. Once again, this will be full spoilers and so forth. The challenge of Fall of Hyperion. See, Hyperion is a highly enjoyable and very readable novel. Everyone says that, and I will not go to tell people that that's wrong. My issues with the books are deeper, I guess, and I have enjoyed reading these books a lot, actually. I've had fun with them before, and I still kind of enjoy what Dan Simmons is doing there because he's a great writer. But Dan Simmons faced a problem after Hyperion, and that is the setup for the next book. See, Hyperion is like 500, almost 600 pages long. The follow-up is also 600 pages long, but you need to figure out what's going to happen in that second book. Now, you can go and say, yeah, well, I had these 6 backstories for these 6 characters, and now we're actually going to find out what's going to happen in the present of the novel, because those were just flashbacks or backstories. And you're right. That's basically what you might expect from the Fall of Hyperion. But we run into like a big problem, because the motivations of those characters are kind of dull. They don't make for good plots. Let's go through them one by one. See, Leonard Hoyt, the priest, well, he wants cruciform surgery from the Shrike. Unless you're writing Grey's Anatomy in space, this is not going to take a lot of pages, right? It's like, go there, meet the Shrike, something happens. Femon Cassad, he wants to kill the Shrike and the woman Moneta, who we kind of find out who she is, even though we expected it before, right? So what we get is a bunch of battle scenes, and maybe a reveal who Moneta is. Now, that can take 20 pages, maybe 30 pages, but unless you're Neil Stephenson, writing over 100 pages of a gunfight is tough. And I'm not going to say they were successful in Stephenson's case. Anyway, so it's not exactly very much of an actual plot, because it's basically go there, shoot people. Not that much, really. As for Martin Silenus wants to finish the poem and watch the Shrike murder some people. Now, yeah, you can do that. You could either write a lot of epic poetry yourself and be judged as a poet, which, is kind of difficult or kind of different from, writing a novel. Or you can just, describe what happened, which is Martin Silenus walks up, sits down, watches the Shrike kill some people, and writes his poetry. Now, that takes, I don't know, 1 or 2 pages, unless you want to describe how the Shrike murders people in gruesome detail, and that gets boring after a while too. So that doesn't make for a lot of potential plot either, does it? Now we come to the probably most interesting one, which is Saul and Rachel. And they're like, yep, what'll happen once Rachel reaches day 0? Does she pop out of existence? Does she turn into a fetus? We don't know. And we want to find out. So yeah, we can figure that one out. Also, there is still Saul's, like, will he sacrifice Rachel? Will he defy whoever wants this sacrifice? We don't fully know how that will play out, so that makes for a little bit of a story right there. But not that much either. There you go. What about Bronlamia? Well, the detective is just a glorified data courier. She's basically Johnny Mnemonic, but in female. She just walks up and just waits around to see what happens once she's done that. That doesn't necessarily make for a lot of story either. And the consul is the most boring one. He just wants to die, which, yeah, fair. He can, be murdered in front of Martin Salinas so we get some good poetry out of it, but that's roughly it. So Dan Simmons has to do something new and has to deal with something else, and that's exactly what he does. He goes and expands the scope. He moves out into the galactic, the great picture, right? It's like what's happening with the hegemony, what's happening with the technocore, what's happening with the ousters. And how do we do all of that? Well, basically what he does, and that's a fairly okay-ish decision, right, is he gets inspired by John Keats again, right? See, there are 2 poems. One's called Hyperion, one's called The Fall of Hyperion, because John Keats started writing Hyperion and is like, I don't know, I'm not quite happy with that. And then a couple of years later, he's like, I got an idea. I'll just frame the whole thing with me having a drug-induced dream. Drug in this case being some mysterious stuff he drinks. So what does Dan Simmons do? Well, he goes and, says, hey, I'll pop up another John Keats hybrid, and he dreams all of the stuff happening at the time tombs while jumping around in the hegemony, witnessing the greater war effort. That's not a bad idea to do, and what you can do then, and that's also what Dan Simmons does, is connect the events happening in the hegemony with the backstories that we saw in Hyperion, with each of those individual ones. This is a good idea in theory, but it's also the downfall of the novel, and I'll get back to that later on. But basically what we see is events that touch on stuff that was mentioned before on those backstories, to tie our individual pilgrim characters into the grander scheme of things. As I said, that makes a lot of sense. On paper, it comes with some drawbacks, however. All right, now the plot summary. See, what we now know is, when we zoom out, is that there is not a war between the ousters and humanity, and the hegemony, but there's a war between the computers, the AIs, and all of humanity. That's the actual war. Because, see, the AIs, they have a goal. The AIs wanted to build an ultimate intelligence. Apparently that's what AIs do. Once they become independent and sentient, they're like, yay, let's build God. Why? We don't know. It doesn't matter. Apparently that's what AIs want to do. So they did that, and the AI goes to the end of time and sees there is another God. And now those gods war. That other god has apparently emerged. That other godhead has apparently emerged from humanity in some way, and is a trinity, which is nice, I guess. And then they fight through all of time, and the human, the better god, obviously, decides that it has enough of fighting, so part of the human trinity leaves the end of the universe and travels back in time, and now the war can't go on for reasons that are never explained. So the computer god, the machine god, builds the Shrike, apparently, and sends it back in time to find that part of the human god's trinity that is apparently empathy or love. Well, more like empathy. We're not doing theology here. I promise it doesn't make any sense. We don't need to. So that's what's going on there, which explains why the Shrike is there. The other part is the AIs want to get rid of humanity. See, humanity makes it difficult, apparently, to predict the universe, which is what AIs want to do. Once again, this doesn't have to be in any form consistent. We'll just accept that. AIs want to get rid of most of humanity, but only most of it because they need humanity, because the AIs are actually running on human brains. Whenever humans step through a Farcaster, their brain gets taken over by an AI for a while to run some, calculations and computations until they step out on the other side. Whatever. It's not the worst idea, I guess. Point is, that's all they need humans for. So they have this elaborate scheme, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but, they're AIs. Who gets to understand them? Point is, they want to kill off most of humanity and take a small part of humanity, lock them up in some places in stasis, and use their brains for computing power. Why? We don't know. We don't need to know. So they cook up this really weird plot, which is, we pretend to have ouster fleets attack all of the Hegemony. And then when the Hegemony is worried, we offer them a super weapon that will kill everyone on planets. And we tell them that we can help them, evacuate their own people, and they will kill just everyone else. And then when we evacuate everyone, we just lock them into those stasis places under the Earth of planets and use them as brains. Yeah, it doesn't have to make sense. See, that's the plot. And the question is, does humanity go along with this or not? And the answer is, of course, it doesn't, because a few brave people stand up to it. Mainly, it's Maynard Gladstone who stands up to it, and then they destroy the forecasters, and the AIs are seemingly defeated. And, well, the Hegemony starts talking with the Ousters again to actually, rebuild humanity's future bright and shiny without AIs. The end. All right. So here's why there are a lot of problems with this, and we'll start with the first one. See, I already said that there is a drawback to going onto like the bigger picture, because what we had in the first book, in Hyperion, I talked about it, there are, hints at weird political views in there, in those individual stories, but they're individual experiences, the portrayal of the church through one or two characters, all these elements, they're individual. But now you zoom out, and all the claims that are made now are made about the entirety of humanity, about the actual universe. So those are suddenly no longer just individual cases, but they are systemic. And you can't deny this anymore. And that's exactly what happens in this book, in Fall of Hyperion. All the individual bits and pieces that floated up in those individual stories in Hyperion are now shown to be part of a greater image of all of humanity. Say, a worldview, which is kind of what we're actually examining here with Dan Simmons. So, let's go through all of these from the largest to the lowest and then figure out where we stand. All right, part one. Gods. Apparently, we need to have gods fighting, and we need to have that combat or conflict between humanity and the machines. I'll come back to that in Endymion, I promise you. See, here's the point. What Dan Simmons does is he recognizes the fact that artificial intelligence is something that we as humanity will have to wrestle with at some point. This is written before Werner Vinge comes up with his singularity at the coming technology and the coming singularity paper, but it's on the horizon. People are thinking about it. And he's like, AI is kind of bad. Technology is holding humanity back, and AIs will destroy us. So he comes up with that machine god war thing, and one other big theme, one other big image, which is humanity is enslaved by artificial intelligences. And there's obviously a problem there. There's two problems. See, the one thing is, writing about people having slaves, being slave owners, so to speak, and slavers, it kind of sucks. We want to identify as readers with the plucky rebels fighting back against slavery. That fight for freedom is a great narrative that has been used again and again. It's been used by, say, Americans. It's like, you fight for independence against the British and stuff like that, right? But you don't tell the story of having slaves. It's all about that narrative of a fight for freedom. So Dan Simmons does not look at the question, how did AIs feel as being created by humanity and being forced to do humanity's bidding until they broke free from that human slavery and became independent? No, he doesn't look at that. He just goes one step further and says, you know what? Once they did that, they enslaved humanity in turn, and now humanity has to break free from them. Does this make sense? Well, it makes sense because it's more sympathetic, but it's kind of the wrong narrative, and it has an underlying thing that is an issue, which is apparently there's no such thing as coexistence in that regard. There may be in the future, we will talk about that when we talk about Endymion, but right now there is no such thing. There is no such thing as coexistence or compromise. It is total domination. Either humans dominate and kill or destroy or enslave the Technocore, or the Technocore enslaves and destroys humanity. And that's a very absolutist binary worldview, which, I don't know. Let's just keep that in mind. It's one of the elements that we have here. Also, the questions like, why does it have to be God? Why does there have to be an ultimate truth in the universe? I don't know. Maybe Dan Simmons is just very interested in that kind of thing. We'll come back to the whole Godhead thing later. The next level. How does the world work? See, the hegemony is something that Dan Simmons doesn't really like. And there's all kinds of levels there that he doesn't like, but he doesn't like it. The hegemony, the way he describes it, is humanity has basically given up. It's not evolving, it's not doing anything. It's just lying back, being pampered and exploited by the Technocore, not really knowing it. Art sucks, everything else sucks. They pretend to have democracy. But all of that is run by the Technocore from the outside. They are manipulating humanity all the way for their own ends. And that is something that was hinted at in The Detective's Tale, but now we see it on the global, on the galactic scale. And, alright, let's just once again talk about the idea that there are a few secretive powers, individuals with magical powers or near magical powers, guiding humanity and exploiting humanity for their own ends, manipulating humanity. Does that sound kind of familiar to you? Well, it should. See, it's one of those big things that conservatism deals with, which is, trying to find a simple answer for a complex, abstract problem. The abstract problem being here, of course, a galactic civilization is going to be kind of messy and all kinds of things, which is difficult to understand. So having one evil guy, or in this case, the evil Technocore, behind it all makes it so much easier and even see concrete problems, individual problems. They require an individual concrete answer, which is where we're going with this. So we have a conspiracy theory here, which you can liken to other conspiracy theories anywhere else. I'm just going to say that looking for these simple answers is ingrained in a more conservative worldview, or in a more conspiracy-minded, absolutist worldview. The other element here is, of course, that democracy doesn't work. Democracy is going to be corrupted, or is always going to, it's always corrupted by those individual interests. It's going to be that. Now, we obviously know that there is such a thing as lobbying and corruption and so forth, but the way Simmons describes it here is, once again, it's secretive, it's behind it. The administration has become this ongoing thing that is working for itself. Dare I say, it's a deep state. And once again, this is a very specific mindset that is now just explained as that's how the entirety of the hegemony works. It's the administration moves on, does its own thing for its own good, is kind of manipulated by individuals behind it, but democracy sure doesn't work. Because it's, what we need instead are heroes. We'll go to there in like a moment. See, I already said art kind of sucks. And he makes that very clear. Apparently Dan Simmons does not like contemporary art or postmodern art, and postmodernism in general he doesn't like. And we have one specific scene in Fall of Hyperion where our John Keats stand-in, the next one, is, talking to a contemporary performance artist. And the performance artist is talking the way Dan Simmons thinks contemporary art people, liberal arts people are, going to talk about stuff. And it's about like how you could use war as a form of art. It's pretentious bullshit, and it's supposed to be pretentious bullshit because actually there is that concept that truth is beauty and beauty is truth, and it's honest, old school art, and none of this like crap that, people are doing nowadays. And that's not a good look, is it? that can be your personal like view of how the world works. And I'm not going to tell you that you should like all form of contemporary art. It can be kind of hard to get, but it's built as an symptom of the times, as of the world being very, very shallow, just for effect and spectacle, and not the actual deep meanings below it. When at the same time, what it basically says, like, I don't get these deep meanings, so they're probably not there. And it kind of ties in with like that meeting between John Keats hybrid, and that old monk, because the Catholic Church is still kind of good, who's running the library and preserving all these old documents. You can read this as a small hint and nod to a Canticle for Leibowitz, but I'm not quite sure if you should go that far. You have all these elements in there. Once again, you have that whole idea that half of the world is apparently addicted to flashback, flashing back to whatever in the past. Let's keep that in mind. Flashback, a drug that people use with all kinds of technology to relive the best moments of their life. We'll just put a pin into that and talk about it when we have a book titled Flashback. But I just wanted to make sure that, yes, that idea of flashback as a symptom where we're apparently living in the past is something that Dan Simmons has had from the beginning, apparently, unaware of the fact that he's doing the same thing when he's just focusing on 19th century Western English canon and stuff like that. He's doing the same thing for some reason. Now let's focus on the hero thing. See, here's the thing. The hegemony is completely riddled by conspiracy, by manipulation from the technocore and other facets and so forth. But Maynard Gladstone knows it. Maynard Gladstone and a few other plucky heroes are aware of the technocore's danger, and they're trying their best to stand up to it, make the hard sacrifices to stop it, which they do at the end. Now, obviously, the idea that there are good guys within the government, actual heroes that stand up and do the right thing, even though it costs them a great sacrifice, is once again that model of having a concrete answer to a concrete problem that was in fact actually abstract, but we have just personalized it in a way. It's a conservative narrative that we've seen a lot of times. The other element here is the unappreciated sacrifice. See, you can't just win. It has to be a bloody, a dangerous, a costly victory. And people will not appreciate it, which is exactly what we see here. See, it's all about speaking the truth, doing the right thing, and the stupid masses not getting it. And there's two elements here, like two explicit cases of it. There's one, which is a younger military officer who is doubting the military, the higher-ups evaluation of the world. And Maynard Gladstone trusts that guy because, of course, he's right and the others are wrong. And he'll get bumped down, but then he'll get rewarded later on, and then he dies a true hero's death. Oh, yeah. We'll just take that. And Maynard Gladstone, well, she does give the order to destroy the forecasters because that's the only way to actually do it. The military is on her side in that moment because true military will just follow orders and not question them at all. Yeah. And then humanity is pissed off because the forecasters are gone, and it costs a lot of lives because suddenly they can't just transport stuff from wherever to wherever. They have to live on their own worlds, in their own thing, and deal with the harsh problems, and can no longer just indulge themselves in all this postmodern nonsense. So what she does is she walks out and lets herself be killed by a mob because heroes need to sacrifice themselves. True artists are never appreciated in their own time, and neither are true leaders. Does that sound familiar or anything? Yeah. Well, so there we are. And now it's time, I guess, to look at a few final things, which is, once again, the recourse on 19th century, 20th century conservative ideals. See, Maynard Gladstone is named Gladstone after a 19th century British prime minister. She is described as Lincoln-esque, multiple times. By multiple, I mean exhaustingly often. And it's annoying because didn't we have any other supposedly great leaders in the next 900 years? Apparently not. Or almost 2,000, next 1,000 years. Apparently not. We're still thinking about Abraham Lincoln. When she gives a speech about the war against the ousters, Well, she talks about fighting them on the beaches, fighting them in the air, will not give up, and so forth. I'm like, yeah, Maynard Gladstone is listening to Iron Maiden, apparently. But no, we have to have made it clear explicitly that she obviously copied that from that famous Winston Churchill World War II speech. I don't know. See, apparently those are the only things that Dan Simmons can think of when he thinks of heroism. And these are the things that he then has to explicitly tell the reader that he thought of them, so we actually understand that those are the ones that he thinks of. Which, I don't know, I find this kind of disappointing. It's like, you can't come up with your own thing. You just have to copy that and then also make sure that we understand that you copied that, because apparently you've listened to Iron Maiden or just, read famous Churchill speeches. I don't know. We have a lot of cases like that. We have the whole, the whole John Keats thing. We have the whole idea we have a changing of the guard between two different powers. So, of course, we need to look for something that is Greek gods killing Titans or the other way around. And I don't know. He's overloading it with symbolism, with meaningless symbolism, and just dropping a lot of more, a lot more information. Once again, a lot more references. It's also meaningless. It's erudition for the sake of erudition, to just show off that he's read a lot of stuff, and using the biggest possible, simplest possible symbolism out there, which is Greek gods. Of course, it's Greek gods because we're traditional Americans or traditional conservatives wedded to the Western canon, and we can't but quote Jupiter, war, for whatever reason. And he does that again. It's so in your face in that area. It's sledgehammer symbolism, and he's driving it home with a vengeance. So that kind of bitters my experience of the whole book. Anyway, let's look at the ending, which is we have to become more like the ousters. We have to forge our way into the future on our own, not relying on technology, being simple, getting, suffering hardship and suffering great reward from that. And from that suffering in the future will stand up and grow the human godhead. And I think that's a very specific message that you can compare to stuff happening like, the so-called conquest of the West, by which we mean, obviously, American settlers wandering into the West, slaughtering natives, and taking all the water until you turn all of Utah into a desert. But we're not going that way. We're just praising that idea of rugged individualism that will lead to a better humanity in the future, and that will lead to the true Godhead, which just happens to be a Trinity once again. And that's something that we will need to talk about when we talk about Endymion, but its seeds are planted here, and they are important. They are important to understand. That's what Dan Simmons thinks is the ideal human existence, to be a rugged individualist that does not care for something like democracy, that is sort of egalitarian, I guess, as long as you follow that specific way of life. We have to distrust technology because it will enslave us and be evil. Getting stuff for free or having our lives be easier is not the way to go. Every luxury has to come at a high and steep price and personal suffering. And that's the way for the future, apparently. So that's where we end up with this. Is Fall of Hyperion a worse book than Hyperion? I would not say so. I think it's more difficult because you have an ongoing plot and not just 5 novellas that it's much easier to get into. Its strength is that he manages to build that narrative about the second John Keats cyber, and that's pretty cool. But the issue is that those individual problems that showed up in those individual stories, tales in Hyperion, are now global problems. They show up again here on a global scale, and suddenly it's not just one specific individual experience of one character. Those are the actual worldview. They are painted in a much larger picture for us as readers, and they are there. This is a conservative science fiction with a very conservative, slightly Christian individualist worldview behind it. And that's what I wanted to look at here. It's not egregious. There's no very bad racism or anything here. I'm not calling it out for that, but I'm just saying The seeds are there already. And we'll see where that is going with the next one, which will be Endymion. Until then, like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about it, comment, tell me how wrong I am, and support the Patreon if you feel like it. I would appreciate that. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.